Margaret Williams had been walking the same corridors of Windsor Castle for 23 years. Her black leather shoes made soft clicking sounds on the ancient stone floors as she made her morning rounds. At 55, she knew every corner, every hidden passage, and every shadow in the royal residence. The other guards called her Iron Maggie because nothing ever escaped her watchful eyes. That Tuesday morning in October felt different somehow. The autumn light streaming through the tall windows seemed brighter, and Margaret found herself thinking about her grandson Tommy, who lived 3 hours away in Manchester. She hadn't seen him in 6 months because of her demanding work schedule. Being a palace sentinel meant missing family dinners, birthday parties, and school plays. As Margaret checked the security cameras in the East Wing, she noticed young Prince George walking toward the library with his tutor, Mrs. Henderson. The 10-year-old prince looked serious for his age, carrying a stack of books that seemed almost too heavy for his small frame. Margaret had watched him grow up within these walls, always polite, always curious about everything around him. She remembered the first time she met Prince George when he was just 4 years old. He had gotten separated from his nanny during a family gathering and wandered into the security office where Margaret was working. Instead of crying or demanding to be taken back immediately, the little prince had asked her what all the monitors were for. Margaret had patiently explained how they kept everyone in the palace safe, and Prince George had listened with the kind of attention most children reserved for cartoon shows. "Mrs. Williams, do you have children?" Prince George had asked that day, his small hand reaching up to touch one of the security screens. "I have a daughter, Your Royal Highness, and she has a little boy about your age," Margaret had replied, adjusting the camera angle to give him a better view. "Does he live in a big house like this?" Prince George had continued, his eyes wide with curiosity. "No, sir. He lives in a normal house with a small garden where he can play football," Margaret had answered honestly. "I wish I could play football in a garden," Prince George had said quietly, and something in his voice had touched Margaret's heart in a way she couldn't explain. Now, 6 years later, Margaret still remembered that conversation every time she saw the young prince walking through the palace halls. He had grown taller and more mature, but she could still see that same curiosity and gentleness in his eyes. However, she had also noticed something else developing in him over the years, a deep awareness of the people around him and genuine care for their well-being. Just last week, Prince George had stopped to talk with Mrs. Peterson, the elderly woman who cleaned the palace windows. Margaret had been nearby conducting her routine security check when she overheard their conversation. Prince George had asked Mrs. Peterson about her arthritis, which had been bothering her lately. He had even suggested that she should take breaks more often, and offered to speak with the palace management about getting her a more comfortable chair for her work. Margaret's radio crackled to life, interrupting her thoughts. "Williams, report to the main office," came the voice of her supervisor, Captain Roberts. Margaret acknowledged the call and made her way through the familiar corridors, wondering what might be waiting for her. Captain Roberts was sitting behind his desk when Margaret entered, looking more serious than usual. "Close the door, Williams," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "We need to discuss your schedule for the next few months." Margaret sat down, her mind immediately jumping to thoughts of overtime and missed family time. "What's the situation, sir?" she asked, keeping her voice professional despite her growing concern. "The royal family will be traveling extensively this winter," Captain Roberts explained, pulling out a thick folder. "They'll need additional security detail for several international trips, and your experience makes you the obvious choice for the assignment." Margaret's heart sank as she realized what this meant. More time away from home, more missed opportunities to see her family, and definitely no chance of attending Tommy's Christmas play at school. She had already missed his birthday in September because of a security emergency at the palace. "When would this assignment begin?" Margaret asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Next week," Captain Roberts replied. The family has official visits planned in 3 different countries, and each trip requires weeks of preparation and security coordination. You'd be gone for at least 2 months, possibly longer, depending on how the diplomatic schedule develops. Margaret nodded slowly, trying to process the information while maintaining her professional composure. She thought about her daughter Sarah, who had been asking when Margaret might finally take some time off to spend with the family. She thought about Tommy, who had specifically requested that his grandmother come to his Christmas performance, where he would be playing one of the 3 wise men. "I understand the importance of the assignment, sir," Margaret said carefully. "Could I have some time to consider the details?" Captain Roberts looked surprised. In all their years of working together, Margaret had never asked for time to think about an assignment. She had always been the first to volunteer for extra duties and the last to request time off. "Of course," he said, though his expression showed his confusion. "Take until tomorrow morning. But I should mention that this assignment comes with significant recognition and could lead to a promotion to Senior Security Coordinator." After leaving Captain Roberts' office, Margaret found herself walking slowly through the palace gardens. The autumn air was crisp, and the leaves on the ancient oak trees had turned brilliant shades of orange and gold. She had always found peace in these gardens, especially during difficult decisions or stressful days. As she walked along the gravel path, she heard familiar laughter coming from the direction of the greenhouse. Curious, Margaret moved closer and saw Prince George helping one of the gardeners plant winter flowers. His sleeves were rolled up, and his hands were covered in soil as he carefully placed each plant in the prepared ground. "Make sure the roots have enough space," Prince George was saying to the gardener, a man named Mr. Davis, who had worked at the palace for over 30 years. "My great-grandmother always said that plants need room to grow, just like people do." Mr. Davis smiled at the young prince's enthusiasm. "You have good instincts, Your Royal Highness. These flowers will bloom beautifully in the spring because you've given them such careful attention." Prince George stood up and brushed the dirt from his hands. "Mr. Davis, do you have grandchildren?" he asked, the same curiosity in his voice that Margaret remembered from years ago. "I do, sir. 3 of them, all living up in Scotland with my daughter," Mr. Davis replied, his face lighting up at the mention of his family. "When was the last time you saw them?" Prince George continued, genuinely interested in the answer. Mr. Davis's smile faltered slightly. "It's been almost a year, sir. The work here keeps me quite busy, and Scotland is a long journey." Prince George was quiet for a moment, considering this information. "That seems like too long," he said thoughtfully. "Family should be together more often, don't you think?" Margaret found herself nodding in agreement as she listened to this conversation from her hidden position behind the greenhouse wall. The young prince's words echoed her own thoughts about the time she had been spending away from her own family. "Indeed, sir," Mr. Davis agreed. "But duty comes first, as it always has." "But what if duty could include taking care of the people who take care of us?" Prince George asked, his question showing a wisdom that seemed beyond his 10 years. Margaret's radio crackled again, calling her back to her regular duties. But as she walked away from the greenhouse, Prince George's words stayed with her. She had spent so many years focusing on her duty to protect the royal family that she had forgotten about her duty to her own family. That evening, Margaret sat in her small apartment near the palace, looking at photographs of Tommy and Sarah. Her phone rang, and Sarah's familiar voice filled the quiet room. "Mom, I know you're busy, but Tommy has been asking about you every day," Sarah said gently. "His Christmas play is in 6 weeks, and he's been practicing his lines in case you can make it." Margaret closed her eyes, feeling the weight of all the missed moments pressing down on her chest. "What's his part?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "He's one of the 3 wise men," Sarah replied. "He keeps saying that wise men know when to come home." After hanging up the phone, Margaret sat in silence for a long time. She thought about her years of faithful service, about the pride she felt in protecting the royal family, and about the recognition that would come with the new assignment. But she also thought about Tommy's wise words and Prince George's thoughtful questions about family and duty. For the first time in 23 years, Margaret Williams began to seriously consider what it might mean to put her family first. The next morning arrived gray and drizzly, with October rain pattering against Margaret's apartment windows. She had barely slept, spending most of the night staring at the ceiling and thinking about Captain Roberts' offer. By dawn, she still hadn't reached a clear decision, but she knew she needed to report to work and face whatever the day would bring. Margaret arrived at the palace earlier than usual, hoping the quiet morning hours would help clear her mind. As she made her way through the security entrance, she noticed that several lights were already on in the family wing of the palace. The royal family were early risers, but this seemed unusually early even for them. Her curiosity was answered when she encountered Mrs. Henderson, Prince George's tutor, in the main corridor. The elderly woman looked tired, but smiled warmly when she saw Margaret. "Good morning, Mrs. Williams," Mrs. Henderson said, adjusting her glasses. "You're here early today." "Good morning, Mrs. Henderson. Is everything all right? I noticed lights on in the family wing," Margaret replied. Her security instincts automatically engaged. "Oh yes, everything's fine," Mrs. Henderson assured her. "Prince George wanted to start his day early today. He has something special planned, though he's been quite secretive about it." Margaret nodded and continued with her morning rounds, but she found her attention drawn repeatedly toward the family wing. Around 8 o'clock, as she was checking the perimeter cameras, she noticed Prince George walking purposefully through the corridors with what appeared to be a notebook in his hands. An hour later, Margaret received an unexpected message. One of the junior staff members approached her with a formal-looking envelope bearing the royal seal. Inside was a handwritten note requesting her presence in the small library at 10 o'clock for what was described as an important discussion regarding palace operations. Margaret's first thought was that Prince George had somehow gotten into trouble and that she was being called to provide security details about something he had done. But as she read the note again, she realized it was written in Prince George's own careful handwriting, and the formal language seemed oddly mature for a 10-year-old. When 10 o'clock arrived, Margaret made her way to the small library, a cozy room lined with books and comfortable reading chairs that the family often used for private conversations. She knocked gently on the door and heard Prince George's voice inviting her to enter. Inside, she found Prince George sitting at a small wooden table with several books open in front of him, along with his notebook and what appeared to be a carefully prepared tea service. He stood up politely when she entered, just as he had been taught, but there was something different about his demeanor. He seemed more serious than usual, but also strangely confident. "Good morning, Mrs. Williams," Prince George said formally. "Thank you for coming. Please, have a seat." Margaret sat down across from him, feeling somewhat puzzled by the unusual situation. "Good morning, Your Royal Highness. How can I help you today?" Prince George poured tea into 2 cups with the careful precision of someone who had been practicing the task. "Mrs. Williams, I've been doing some research," he began, opening his notebook to a page covered with neat handwriting. "I've been learning about the people who work here in the palace, and I've discovered some things that I think are important." Margaret accepted the cup of tea, unsure where this conversation was heading, but impressed by Prince George's serious approach to whatever he wanted to discuss. "I know that you've been working here for 23 years," Prince George continued, consulting his notes. "I also know that you have a daughter named Sarah and a grandson named Tommy who live in Manchester. And I know that Captain Roberts offered you a very important assignment yesterday that would keep you away from home for a long time." Margaret nearly dropped her teacup in surprise. "Your Royal Highness, how do you know about the assignment?" she asked. wondering if there had been some breach of security protocol. Prince George's cheeks reddened slightly. "I wasn't eavesdropping on purpose," he said quickly. "I was in the corridor near Captain Roberts' office yesterday when you came out and you looked upset. I heard Captain Roberts talking to someone on the phone later about needing experienced security for the winter trips." Margaret realized that Prince George had put the pieces together himself, showing the same attention to detail and concern for others that she had observed in him over the years. "Mrs. Williams," Prince George continued, "I've been thinking about something my father told me once. He said that being a leader means thinking about the people who help you, not just the things you need them to do." He turned to a different page in his notebook. "I made a list of all the palace employees who have families they don't see very often because of their work here. Mr. Davis hasn't seen his grandchildren in Scotland for almost a year. Mrs. Peterson has a daughter in Wales who just had a baby, but she can't visit because she can't afford to take time off work. And you haven't seen Tommy in 6 months. Margaret felt her throat tighten as she listened to Prince George's careful research. He had clearly spent considerable time and effort learning about the personal lives of the palace staff, something that most people in his position would never think to do. "Your Royal Highness," Margaret said gently, "it's very kind of you to be concerned about us, but we all understand that our duties here are important. Protecting your family is our responsibility." Prince George shook his head firmly. "But Mrs. Williams, what about protecting your family? Shouldn't that be important too?" He opened one of the books on the table, revealing a passage he had marked with a ribbon bookmark. "I've been reading about leadership and responsibility," he explained. "This book says that good leaders take care of the people who take care of them. It says that when people are happy in their personal lives, they do better work and feel more loyal." Margaret was amazed by the depth of Prince George's thinking. At 10 years old, he was grappling with concepts that many adult leaders never fully understood. "I have a proposal," Prince George announced, sitting up straighter in his chair. "What if we could find a way for the winter security assignment to be handled differently? What if instead of sending our most experienced people away for months, we brought in additional temporary security and kept our permanent staff here?" Margaret considered this suggestion, recognizing both its thoughtfulness and its complexity. "That's a very generous idea, Your Royal Highness, but international security arrangements are quite complicated. They require people with specific training and experience." "I know," Prince George replied. "That's why I've been researching security companies that specialize in royal protection. There are several firms that have worked with other royal families around the world, and they have people who are specifically trained for international assignments." He showed Margaret another page in his notebook, where he had written down the names and contact information for 3 different security firms, along with notes about their qualifications and experience. Margaret stared at the notebook in amazement. "Your Royal Highness, this is incredibly thorough research. How did you gather all this information?" Prince George looked slightly embarrassed. "I asked Mrs. Henderson to help me use the computer in the study room. I told her I was working on a project about careers and jobs, which is sort of true." "And what exactly are you proposing?" Margaret asked, though she was beginning to understand the direction of his thinking. "I want to present this information to my parents," Prince George said firmly. "I want to show them how we could handle the winter travel security differently, so that people like you and Mr. Davis and Mrs. Peterson could spend time with their families during the holidays." Margaret felt a mix of emotions washing over her. She was touched by Prince George's concern for her personal situation, impressed by his initiative and research skills, and slightly worried about the potential consequences of a 10-year-old prince becoming involved in palace security decisions. "Your Royal Highness, I appreciate your concern more than I can express," Margaret said carefully. "But this decision involves many factors that go beyond just my personal situation. There are protocols and procedures that have been in place for many years." Prince George nodded seriously. "I understand that, Mrs. Williams. But my great-grandmother used to say that just because something has always been done a certain way doesn't mean it's the best way to do it. She said that sometimes the most important changes come from thinking about things differently. He reached across the table and handed Margaret a sealed envelope. I've written a formal letter to my parents explaining my research and my suggestions, but I won't give it to them unless you think it's appropriate. Margaret opened the envelope and read the letter, which was written in Prince George's careful handwriting, but with language that showed remarkable maturity and thoughtfulness. The letter outlined his research findings, explained his concerns about palace employees missing time with their families, and presented a detailed alternative plan for handling the winter security assignments. "Your Royal Highness," Margaret said slowly, "this letter is extraordinary, but I need you to understand that even if your parents agree with your suggestions, there may be reasons beyond their control that make changes difficult." "I know," Prince George replied. "But Mrs. Williams, my grandmother always says that we should try to do the right thing, even if it's difficult. And I think helping people spend time with their families is the right thing." Margaret looked at the young prince across the table, seeing in his earnest expression the same concern and determination that would one day make him a leader. She thought about Tommy's Christmas play, about all the missed birthdays and family dinners, and about Prince George's wise words about duty, including care for others. "What would you like me to do?" Margaret asked quietly. Prince George's face lit up with hope. "Would you help me present this information to my parents? I think it would be more convincing coming from both of us, from someone who understands security requirements and from someone who cares about the people involved." Margaret realized that she was standing at a crossroads moment in her career and her life. She could decline Prince George's proposal, accept the winter assignment, and continue down the familiar path she had traveled for 23 years. Or she could take a chance on a 10-year-old prince's vision of leadership that put people first. "Yes, Your Royal Highness," Margaret heard herself saying. "I'll help you present this to your parents." The meeting with Prince George's parents was scheduled for the following afternoon in the family's private sitting room. Margaret had spent the entire previous evening reviewing security protocols and trying to anticipate every possible question or concern that might arise during their presentation. When the appointed time arrived, Margaret found herself more nervous than she had been in years. She had briefed members of the royal family on security matters countless times before, but this felt completely different. She wasn't just reporting on threats or safety procedures. She was asking them to reconsider fundamental aspects of how the palace operated. Prince George met her outside the sitting room, looking unusually formal in a pressed shirt and tie. He carried his research notebook and the letter he had prepared, and Margaret could see that he was trying to hide his own nervousness behind a facade of royal composure. "Mrs. Williams," he said quietly, "thank you for agreeing to help me with this. Whatever happens, I want you to know that I think you're very brave." Margaret smiled despite her anxiety. "Your Royal Highness, I think you're the brave one. What you're proposing takes real courage." When they entered the sitting room, they found Prince George's parents seated in comfortable armchairs near the fireplace. The atmosphere was warm and informal, but Margaret could sense the underlying seriousness of the occasion. Prince George's father looked up with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "George tells us you have something important to discuss with us," he said, gesturing for Margaret to take a seat. "We understand it concerns palace operations and staff welfare." Margaret glanced at Prince George, who nodded encouragingly. "Your Royal Highness," she began, addressing both parents, "Prince George has conducted extensive research into an issue that affects many of the palace's long-term employees. With your permission, he would like to present his findings and suggestions." Prince George's mother leaned forward with interest. "We're listening, darling," she said to her son. "Please tell us what you've discovered." Prince George opened his notebook and began to speak with the same careful preparation Margaret had witnessed during their private meeting. He explained his research into the personal situations of various palace employees, his understanding of the upcoming winter security assignments, and his concerns about the impact of extended family separations. As Prince George talked, Margaret watched his parents' faces, trying to gauge their reactions. She could see surprise, pride, and growing thoughtfulness in their expressions as they realized the depth of their son's research and the maturity of his reasoning. "So you see," Prince George concluded, "I believe we have an opportunity to show real leadership by finding ways to protect our family's security while also protecting our staff members' families." His father was quiet for several moments before speaking. "George, this is remarkable work. But help me understand something. What prompted you to begin this research? What made you think about these issues?" Prince George looked down at his notebook, then back up at his parents. "Last week I heard Mrs. Peterson talking to another staff member about missing her new granddaughter's baptism because she couldn't take time off work. And yesterday I saw Mrs. Williams looking very sad after her meeting with Captain Roberts. I started wondering if there was a better way to do things." Prince George's mother exchanged a meaningful look with her husband. "Mrs. Williams," she said gently, "would you help us understand the security implications of what George is proposing? We want to take his suggestions seriously, but we also need to ensure that safety requirements are met." Margaret had prepared for this moment, and she spoke carefully about the balance between security needs and staff welfare. She explained her own situation with her grandson's Christmas play, but she also emphasized that she understood the importance of the winter assignments and would fulfill whatever duties were required of her. "However," Margaret continued, "I believe Prince George has identified some genuine alternatives that could meet our security needs while also addressing the human cost of our current approaches." Prince George's father leaned back in his chair, clearly processing everything they had heard. "George, when you researched these alternative security firms, did you also look into their costs and availability?" Prince George nodded eagerly. "Yes, sir. I included cost comparisons in my notes. The temporary international security would cost more initially, but when you consider the long-term benefits of keeping experienced staff happy and loyal, it might actually save money over time." Margaret was impressed once again by the thoroughness of Prince George's preparation. He had considered angles that many professional consultants would have overlooked. "There's something else," Prince George added quietly. "I think this could be an opportunity to show the country that our family cares about working families. If people know that we're trying to help our employees spend time with their children and grandchildren, it might help them understand that we care about the same things they care about." This comment seemed to particularly resonate with both parents. Margaret could see them considering not just the immediate practical implications, but also the broader message that such changes would send to the public. Prince George's mother spoke first. "George, I'm incredibly proud of the work you've done and the compassion you've shown. These are exactly the qualities we hope you'll develop as you grow up." She turned to Margaret. "Mrs. Williams, we'd like you to work with our security coordinator to fully evaluate Prince George's suggestions. Can you prepare a detailed assessment of the alternative approaches he's proposed?" Margaret felt her heart begin to race with hope. "Of course, Your Royal Highness. I'd be honored to conduct that assessment." "And Mrs. Williams," Prince George's father added, "regardless of what we ultimately decide about the winter assignments, I want you to know that your dedication to our family over the past 23 years has been extraordinary. If you'd prefer to decline the international assignment in order to spend time with your family, we'll find alternative arrangements." Margaret felt tears beginning to form in her eyes. "Thank you, sir. That means more to me than I can express." Prince George beamed with satisfaction at his parents' response, but then his expression became more serious. "There's one more thing," he said. I think we should do this for other people too, not just Mrs. Williams. Mr. Davis should be able to visit his grandchildren in Scotland, and Mrs. Peterson should meet her new granddaughter." His mother smiled warmly. "You're absolutely right, darling. If we're going to make changes, we should make them comprehensively and fairly." 2 weeks later, Margaret found herself in Captain Roberts' office again, but this time the conversation was very different. The assessment of Prince George's proposals had been completed, and the results were better than anyone had expected. The alternative security arrangements were not only feasible, but actually offered some advantages over the traditional approach. "Williams," Captain Roberts said, shaking his head in amazement, "in 30 years of security work, I've never seen anything like this. That young prince has managed to identify solutions that our professional consultants missed." Margaret smiled, thinking about Prince George's determined research and his genuine concern for the palace staff. "He has a gift for seeing situations from other people's perspectives, sir." "Indeed he does," Captain Roberts agreed. "The royal family has approved the new arrangements for the winter travel season. We'll be working with an international security firm for the extended assignments, and our permanent staff will maintain normal schedules." Margaret felt a wave of relief and gratitude washing over her. "Thank you, sir, and thank Prince George." "There's more," Captain Roberts continued. "The royal family has asked me to implement a comprehensive review of all palace employment practices with a focus on work-life balance for long-term staff members. They want to ensure that what happened with this situation doesn't happen again." 3 days before Tommy's Christmas play, Margaret received a personal note from Prince George, delivered by one of the palace couriers to her apartment. The note was brief but heartfelt, wishing her grandson good luck in his performance and expressing hope that she would enjoy spending the holidays with her family. On the evening of the Christmas play, Margaret sat in the front row of Tommy's school auditorium, watching her grandson deliver his lines as one of the 3 wise men with confidence and joy. When he spotted her in the audience, his face lit up with the biggest smile she had ever seen. After the performance, as Tommy ran toward her in his costume, Margaret thought about Prince George's words regarding wise men knowing when to come home. She realized that sometimes wisdom came from the youngest and most unexpected sources. "Grandma!" Tommy shouted as he reached her, throwing his arms around her waist. "You came! You actually came!" "I wouldn't have missed it for anything," Margaret replied, hugging him tightly. "You were absolutely wonderful up there." Sarah appeared beside them, tears in her eyes. "Mum, I can't believe you're here." "Tommy has been talking about nothing else for weeks." As they walked out of the school together, Tommy, chattering excitedly about his performance and asking Margaret to tell him stories about the palace, she felt a deep sense of contentment that she hadn't experienced in years. The following Monday, Margaret returned to work at Windsor Castle with renewed energy and commitment. She knew that her job remained important and demanding, but she also knew that it no longer required her to sacrifice her relationship with her family. During her morning rounds, she encountered Prince George in the corridor near the library. He stopped and greeted her with the same polite formality he showed all palace staff, but there was a knowing smile in his eyes. "Good morning, Mrs. Williams," he said. "I hope you had a pleasant weekend." "Good morning, Your Royal Highness," Margaret replied. "I did indeed. I attended my grandson's Christmas play." "That's wonderful," Prince George said, and Margaret could hear the genuine happiness in his voice. "I'm sure he was excellent." As Prince George continued down the corridor toward his morning lessons, Margaret reflected on how much had changed in just a few weeks. A 10-year-old prince's thoughtful questions and determined research had transformed not only her own life but potentially the lives of many other palace employees. 6 months later, Margaret received word that she had been selected for a promotion to Senior Security Coordinator, a position that would allow her to help implement the new employee welfare policies that had grown out of Prince George's initial suggestions. The irony wasn't lost on her that by initially considering resignation, she had ultimately found a path to greater responsibility and influence. But more importantly, she had learned that true duty sometimes meant having the courage to ask difficult questions and advocate for change, even when that change challenged long-established traditions. Prince George had shown her that real leadership involved caring for the people who served, not just expecting service from them. As Margaret settled into her new role, she often thought about the young prince who had changed so many lives with his thoughtful concern and determined action. She knew that someday, when Prince George became king, the country would be fortunate to have a leader who understood that strength came not from demanding loyalty, but from earning it through genuine care for others. And every time she was able to leave work early to attend one of Tommy's school events or family gatherings, Margaret remembered Prince George's wise observation that good leaders take care of the people who take care of them. It was a lesson she would carry with her for the rest of her career, and one she would share with the next generation of security personnel who would serve the royal family in years to come.